is that basically it's pay to play. It's very Trumpy, right? The idea that, okay, you want to solve this problem, we're going to ask you to pony up, we're going to ask you to put skin in the game. A lot of these asks are the result of the president's personal relationships with different world leaders. And again, I think some of them are going to be highly controversial. The idea of Vladimir Putin taking part in this is inviting the fox into the hen house, the skunk at the picnic, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is a man that's not exactly been in favor of, American-led initiatives. He often tries to tear down American-led initiatives. But, I mean, I do think there's an open question. Will he be hostile to Israel? Will he be hostile to peace in the Middle East? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, he has decent relationships with the Israelis. It's not great. It's professional, though. And, and Putin actually relishes the ability to do outreach to Russian Israelis of Russian descent, many of whom immigrated in the 1980s. So he sees himself as sort of a godfather of this population. It's something like 10% of Israel, like 1 million people that he wants to do outreach to. So, I mean, that's interesting in and of itself. I think the big question gets back to this, Josh. You asked me about whether there's a mandate to tackle other world problems. If Putin's on this board and then they start to try to deal with the question of Ukraine, well, obviously that creates bigger problems. So I think, for me, there's a lot of questions out there based on what we've heard from the White House and what we've seen in the reporting about how wide they want to open this thing up, who gets to join, and then what problems they try to solve. How ambitious are they? Gaza's ambitious enough, from my perspective. This is a huge problem. It's been not easy to solve so far. I welcome the idea of having, multiple world actors, but I'm not sure that all of them are going to be actively positive contributors.
And this might be a premature question to ask because the board itself hasn't fully been formed. But as it does kind of move forward, what benchmarks should we really be watching for here to see if this all is successful or not?
Well, look, I mean, there's a couple of things. There is there's the executive board, and Trump sits at the top of that. There is all of the external participants. And by the way, there are some very good people that have joined this, American businessmen, cyber experts, real estate folks that actually have decent experience, and I think have the will to bring about a better Gaza, if you will. But I think the key benchmarks are, can we get there's a transitional government in Gaza. There's a figure that's been appointed for this role already, but I think the government under this person has not been formed. So we need to see that happen. This is a technocratic government that would not be Hamas, that would be in charge of governing Gaza in ways that leave Hamas out. And that's always been what we've envisioned here. Hamas was the core part of the problem. We're trying to excise that problem. But then here comes the big thing, which is Hamas still controls weapons. They still control territory. They're still attacking Israeli troops. They're still crushing dissent within the territory that they control. We're hearing about human rights violations against Gazans. And of course, you're not hearing a lot of complaints about that in the media. But, these are some of the issues that are happening here. Somebody needs to take this territory from Hamas. Somebody needs to get Hamas out of this territory. I fear that it's only up to Israel because Israel's the only one that's willing to deploy troops. But maybe international pressure, international leadership as part of this, board of peace, maybe we get to a different outcome. That would be welcome, I think.
Jonathan Schanzer, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and helping to break it down. We're going to watch as all of this does play out and see if we get maybe some more information from President Trump tomorrow as he does address those world leaders, those representatives over in Davos. Anything we missed, anything that you want to make sure to add here before I let you go?
Look, I think just the one thing to stress here is the Qatar and Turkey role. It's not getting a lot of attention right now, but it is the one thing that I would watch. It's the thing that the Israelis really don't like, and for good reason. as I mentioned, two patrons of Hamas. The guy that I'm actually most alarmed about is the foreign minister of Turkey. He's the former head of the MIT, the Turkish intelligence services. This is the man that helped create the Hamas headquarters before he was named foreign minister. So he is actually in large part responsible for the entire Hamas policy that the government of Turkey has embraced. By the way, he's also a massive money launderer for Iran, violating sanctions, illicit finance out the wazoo.
Yes. Keep stuttering, you stupid Muppet. You are an idiot and you are a fool. Keep stuttering. You're stupid. Learn how to speak, you stupid Muppet. Ah, you stupid Muppet. Learn how to speak.
More than just the normal economics.
You goddamn mauve. You're a mauve. Learn how to speak, you goddamn mauve. Oh, yeah. We're in the after hours now.
As the economy does continue to strengthen and as the shekel also strengthens.
You're tuned to the right channel.
Israeli people and the Israeli economy have shown great resiliency given the 2 years of war.
We don't point and click on computers. We type. We type code on computers. We don't point and click. You point and click, idiots. You point and click, morons. Oh, yeah, you idiots don't even know how to read. You can't even read. Oh, yeah.
But since the ceasefire, we've seen three major developments that
look at all you idiots. You can't even read.
The last rate cut. One, we've seen the inflation environment moderated. Not just realized inflation, but also
I got your numbers.
Second, we've seen the shekel continue to strengthen.
I got all your numbers.
For more inflation moderation. And third,
I got all your numbers.
I talked to you in the past about the balance between demand and supply shortages of workers in Israel. We've seen that being moderated since the ceasefire. Reservists are coming back. We are seeing more participation in the labor force, and we're seeing some moderation in wage pressure. All these together have tipped the balance into
we got all your numbers.
Cut. And in terms of your questions, we're continuing to do it based on what we've said all along, the developments in inflation and economic activity and in geopolitical uncertainty. We're going to try to do it in as gradual as the developments happen. And we're seeing an interest rate a year out at about 3.5 because we think we are not very far from neutral. So that's our assessment as of now, with a growth rate for next year at 5%. This is assuming the ceasefire continues.
Does the Board of Peace, as proposed by President Trump and adopted by the United Nations Council, help foster that security that the ceasefire would potentially remain?
So, I'm going to speak from an economic perspective. I hope that the mechanism that this brings about, and it got a lot of members that have stakes in this issue, bring about some of the constraints that are related to this. If Israel needs, first and foremost, continued security that will facilitate ceasefire, hopefully it also brings about the mechanism to enhance rehabilitation in Gaza, hopefully bringing prosperity and security there. If those two things happen, then obviously the Israeli economy will continue to do well. Gaza will improve, and I think it will also unlock levers for farther regional arrangements. And if those happen, I think we will see much bigger growth, not just for Israel, but for the region at large.
And this really goes to a key question, which is that Israel has lost some clout in the international sphere. And you've seen this with the Gaza war really becoming a political hot potato in a lot of different places. What do you think it'll take to get the reputation back to a place where travel can come back, where business can keep flooding in, and really maintain the economy?
So you're right. One cannot deny that we've seen sentiment being negative in some circles. Having said that, we've observed, as I mentioned, improvements in high-tech investments, in Israel's risk premium, obviously purchases of our defense equipment. So all that is good. But I think to the extent that sustainable ceasefire and furthermore, basically sustainable regional arrangements are developed, I believe that negative sentiment will dissipate over time.
You are the central banker to Israel. You have an increasingly international presence as well. You talk at a lot of conferences. You're very involved in research around the world. How focused are you on what's happening with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and some of the questions around the intellectual freedom around the Federal Reserve, the political independence of the Federal Reserve? How closely are you watching things like the hearing today with Lisa Cook and beyond?
I won't get into the detail of the Feds. Even, of course, I hold Chairman Powell and the Fed with very high respect. I want to say you've heard me in the past speaking about the importance of maintaining the strength and independent institution. I've said it in the context when the judicial changes in Israel started in 2023. And obviously, central banking is an important institution, and central bank independence is kind of the pillar to facilitate its operation towards price stability, which ultimately facilitate growth and prosperity of the economy. So I think these elements are very, very important. And I think all central banks look at the developments in a way that we want to see central bank independence continue, because we believe that's a pillar for delivering price stability, which we think ultimately, even though sometimes there are short-run trade-offs perhaps, that's ultimately the right way to deliver prosperity to the economy.
Do you think that the independence is more in question today of some of these institutions than they have been in the past?
I think obviously we're seeing a lot of things in the news in not just in the U.S., but I think ultimately it'll come down to us central banks delivering the goods of maintaining price stability, even when the environment is, let's say, more challenging.
In general, do you leave this meeting more optimistic or more pessimistic?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty about various developments, but I think there's also a lot of avenues for hope for better outcomes economically, not just for Israel, but around the world in many ways.
Governor Yaron, thank you so much for being with us. That is Governor Amir Yaron of the Bank of Israel, and I will send it back to you, Francine.
Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much. Bloomberg Surveillance co-anchor Lisa Abramovitz. Now, on tomorrow's show, we'll be joined by the French Trade Minister and, of course, the chief executives of Accenture, Marsh, and Darktrace. Still to come today, an interview with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy, at 10:30 a.m. London time, and of course we'll have full coverage of President Trump's special address to Davos from 1:30 p.m. London time. So it's going to be a busy day. You'll have all the highlights from Davos throughout the next couple of hours. Up next, Bloomberg Brief, and this is Weekend.
I'm Jason Kelly, and this season on Power Players, we're taking you behind the scenes to see how the business of sports has gone global.
I want sports to grow. I want sports to be bigger because we have talent.
What we have achieved in the NWSL from an investor perspective over 2 years is the equivalent of what it took other leagues 25 to 30 years to achieve.
You gotta have a business that's sustainable. The only way it's sustainable is gotta make money.
Pluto TV. Anybody home? Catch Gunsmoke and the Andy Griffith Show. Relive the earliest moments in black and white and ride off into a sunset full of color. Timeless TV anytime. Catch Gunsmoke and the Andy Griffith Show anytime on demand on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
Let's go. On Ask This Old House, we help homeowners across the country tackle small projects that deliver a big impact. Join us for a brand new season of Ask This Old House.
They're trying to save humanity. 1,000 people in an iron box.
No, doctors.
We're going to the front. We take the engine and we control the world.
Oh, yeah.
Tennis Channel 2.
That's right. That's pure code. Look at code. You gotta type that out. You can't point and click on it, you stupid moogs. Stupid, your moves.
It's 5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Stock futures rising after the S&P 500 posted its biggest drop in 3 months. Japanese bonds rebounding, lifting global debt markets. President Trump brushes off concerns of jeopardizing trade deals with the European Union countries ahead of his speech in Davos. And Netflix out with a cautious forecast due to higher program spending and a potential cost issue associated with the Warner Brothers bid. So let's take a look at these markets. A rebound, you could say, but we're well off our highs. We are in the green, which is barely for Nasdaq 100 futures, so it remains to be seen how this mood shifts throughout the day. We're obviously waiting for President Trump to speak in Davos later. That will impact things. And we've had calls for calm, for example, from the Japanese finance minister, also Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in Davos yesterday. Bessent also telling reporters that Japan's economic authorities had assured him that they were going to calm the situation. Let's take a look at bonds, because we did indeed see a little rebound in Japanese bonds. The 10-year yield down about 7 basis points and that 30-year yield down about 14 basis points. We're not back at levels, though, before yesterday just yet. The 10-year yield here in the United States still well above that range that we had put in for several months now. We're still at 427. And then take a look at gold, because this morning we are hitting more records on gold. Right now we're above $4,800 an ounce, and we did top $4,900 an ounce. The VIX hovering around 20. All right, let's get some individual market movers this morning. Over to London and Chloe Nelly. Chloe.
Good morning, Ronnie. Netflix shares are firmly in the red this morning after the company provided quite a lackluster forecast for the first quarter and also said that it would need to pause buybacks so that it can accumulate cash to fund this pending deal for Warner Brothers. So despite the fact that fourth quarter numbers were actually quite strong, this outlook and also this news on buyback really disappointed investors, and we are down almost 6% in pre-market trading. Moving on to the aviation industry, and United Airlines is in the green this morning because fourth quarter numbers were ahead of estimates, and it also said it expects 2026 to be quite strong thanks to both international and domestic travelers. This echoes another upbeat outlook as well from Delta Airlines, and therefore we are up more than 4% this morning. And finally, Intel is extending some of the gains that we saw yesterday. That is after the company was both upgraded by HSBC and Seaport, and that is thanks to really strong AI demand driving orders, and so there's a brightening outlook for Intel, and this reflected in those shares today.
And Intel had a good day yesterday as well. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Nelly there. And coming up in this hour, more conversations from Davos you don't want to miss. We're going to be speaking with Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff. But first, U.S. stock futures could be staging a recovery after the biggest drop in the S&P 500 in 3 months. We're off our highs, but very definitely pointed green. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Van Ram. Ben, was yesterday an outlier of a day? Had liquidity something to do with it when we look at what happened in Japan, for example, or was this very definitely, an intentional sell-off?
Well, it was an intentional fall-off, at least as far as the JGB route was concerned, because what happened new was Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi talking about tax stops on food sales, and that meant that the government is looking at additional fiscal gap of 32 billion, equivalent of $32 billion. Now the key question for the markets is that is coming at a time when the BOJ is already behind in its battle against inflation. And if they add that fiscal gap without an explanation of how they're going to fund it, that added to the market's fears. And that is why we saw the kind of selling. It was a multi-standard deviation event. One, in an entire lifetime of 30 years of trading was thereabouts. The traders are likely to see only one such instance of such a ferocity of move. So I do think that the route was coming, and it just so happened that it happened yesterday. So, but I think that the rest of the markets, if you look at the global markets, the sell-off in equities, that's not the GGB sentiment spilled over obviously, and obviously you've got things going around on Greenland, and which is adding to negative sentiment. But I think that in the US stocks arena, as far as US stocks are concerned, I think that this could be a buying opportunity.
It does seem like potential buyers are stepping in this morning. Ben, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Ben Ryan. Over in Davos, the standoff around Greenland and trade continues to dominate.
It's not a trade on the trade agreement. This is what I keep trying to say. We should compartmentalize this.
For the Europeans, it will be an additional tariff.
Potentially, that's right. Yeah. So the trade agreement, yes, I understand. I was clear about that. I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that the trade agreement with the Europeans purport to solve every problem. And it didn't solve every problem. It solved a lot of problems and put us on a good path. But there are a lot of things it just didn't cover.
Joining us now from Brussels is Bloomberg's Oliver Cook. Oliver, what are we going to figure out if something is going to happen in Davos? Do we need President Trump to arrive there and start having conversations?
I think that will probably determine what the forward project is going to be between Europe and the United States, which I think it's fair to say has probably reached its certainly in the last kind of several dozen years, a low point in the relationship between the sort of traditional allies of the United States and the American president. Donald Trump will be arriving in Davos at some point a little bit later today. And of course, everybody wants to get in the room with the president to try to get an understanding of what his thinking is. The rhetoric from the president of the United States has been somewhat different from some of the rhetoric from some of his advisors who are really trying to get people to not focus on the Greenland issue as much. Jameson Greer there saying that basically the trade deal that's already been agreed to with the Europeans has nothing to do with Arctic security, has nothing to do with the tariffs that are being threatened. We heard it from Scott Bessent yesterday, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, saying basically everybody relax, calm down. What is all this hysteria? We had hysteria back in April of the Liberation Day, but it was not really anything. We had Howard Lutnick writing in the Financial Times that everything would be sort of resolved in a sort of reasonable way. For the Europeans, this feels a lot like basically gaslighting, right, from the U.S. administration. They're the ones who are conflating these two issues of Arctic security and trade. And for the Europeans, they say, how could we not react to this? And the only reason that it resolved itself last time was because the Europeans rolled over. And I think there's a sort of dawning realization in Europe that they cannot continue rolling over indefinitely. Yesterday, it was a trade deficit. Today, it's Greenland. And tomorrow, it'll be something else if they don't stand firm.
There also seems to be this trend of members of the administration, including the president himself, putting out there in the open for everybody to see communications that perhaps were meant to be private. Today, we're learning that Scott Bessent said the Deutsche Bank CEO, Christian Saving, called to basically dismiss his analyst report, George Saravelos, saying, there could be a bit of a sell America trade going on if this continues. And Christian Saving essentially told Scott Bessent that he doesn't believe his analyst. Do we know any more about this?
Yeah, really interesting, Bonnie. This is one of the first notes that I got after the sort of tariff threat that we got over the weekend from Joint Secretary Livros, and I'll just quote directly from it because he was not actually advocating a Sell America trade or anything like that. He was merely pointing out that Europe is the largest lender to the United States. That European countries own $8 trillion of U.S. bonds and equities, almost twice as much as the rest of the world combined, in an environment where the geoeconomic stability of the Western alliance is being disrupted existentially. It's not clear why Europeans would be willing to play this part. And that, of course, got the attention of the bond market. It got the attention of traders and everybody involved in the markets to say, if the Europeans do want to exert pressure on the United States, this is one of the levers that they have theoretically to pull. Now, we should say there is a Danish pension fund, for example. It's got $25 billion, about 100 million of those in treasuries, that have said they're going to sell their U.S. treasuries. All of that being said, Bunny, I think it's a very unlikely path for the Europeans to go. This is effectively deploying sort of economic warfare, but it shows how much influence and how much fear there is in the hearts of not just European politicians, but also the C-suite within Europe about the Trump administration, that the CEO of Deutsche Bank needs to call the U.S. Treasury Secretary to say they don't stand by an analyst note, which is just pointing out information.
Yes, and best in saying that this notion that Europeans would be selling assets came from a single analyst at Deutsche Bank. I think there are more than one analyst out there saying this. Oliver, thank you so much. That's Oliver Crook, and I do want to point out as well that a spokesperson for Deutsche Bank didn't have an immediate comment when contacted by Bloomberg News. Shares of Netflix falling in pre-market trading after a cautious forecast, citing higher program spending and the potential cost of closing its deal with Warner Brothers Discovery. Joining us now is Tom McKenzie, host of Bloomberg Tech Europe. So, Tom, Netflix did well, but the shares have been falling over the last several weeks and months. Investors seem to be really cautious on this potential Warner Brothers Discovery deal. Why?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it, Bonnie. And to your point, look, the earnings actually beat and subscriber numbers came in above 325 million, so that's an 8% increase. So on those metrics, this was positive for Netflix. We were absolutely right that there is caution in the markets around the stock, particularly today, and that is about their forecast for the current quarter, where they see actually profit coming in below estimates. And a lot of that is down to the spend. It's not just Warner Brothers, but it's also on these investments they see. They are seeing attractive investment opportunities in film, in some of their intellectual property. They're building out their gaming franchise, they're building out their live events, but it's going to come at a cost. And of course, there is the Warner Brothers deal as well, which they've amended slightly, so it's now going to be an all-cash offering for Warner Brothers. They also said executives that they are getting and making progress in terms of getting right signals for regulators for that deal. Of course, it hasn't closed yet. They've amended it to make it an all-cash deal. That will come at a cost. So those things seem to be weighing on the share price for Netflix, at least for now. But could have cost around the deal and around those investments to build out the Netflix product for longer term.
Yeah, I mean, those shares were already down almost 7% year to date, and we're not even through January. We'll see how shares trade today because, of course, yesterday was very risk-off. Tom, thank you so much. Tom McKenzie there, co-host of Bloomberg Tech Europe and the Opening Trade. Coming up, we go live to Davos with Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff. This is Bloomberg.
Our data showed from our survey that 41% ranked AI as the number one area of investment in technology going forward. That was followed by cyber, and outside of more generic AI, agentics in particular were high on the list. Well, we've had a tremendous focus on back office. I think you're going to start to see companies taking more and more chances, especially with the regulatory environment, to be able to make a push to really start to transform their business and break out of the pack.
Hey there, beauty besties. Laura Giller here with some incredible news just for you. This June, we've got a date every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on QVC. Let's dive into the world of beauty together. Join me wherever you watch QVC.
Pluto TV's got nostalgia on demand with the Andy Griffith Show.
Anybody home?
From the early years in black and white to seasons in full color.
All right, drive around and say hi.
The Andy Griffith Show, anytime on demand on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
For the right to remain silent.
Tax report came in an hour ago.
Aren't you at least a bit sorry about the people you killed? Dead can't testify.
We're closing in on you.
Samurai, Shogun, Ninja.
和の国に麦わらの一味ついに集結。海軍も手を出せないつわものの国で待ち受ける強敵。
俺は四皇街道をぶっ倒して和の国を開国する。
ワンピース和の国編突入。What is it, Mama?
Some dumb.
Just spit it out.
When's the last time you saw a family squander this one?
Last time I watched the Flintstones.
Brenda is a CIA-trained interrogator with specialization.
Can I make myself clear?
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Ronnie Quinn in New York. Now let's head over to Davos, where Bloomberg's Emily Chang is standing by. Emily.
Bonnie, thank you so much. I'm here in Davos with Mark Benioff, CEO and chair and founder, of course, of Salesforce. Good to be with you in another
Great
country.
To see you, Emily. Aloha.
Aloha from the slopes.
You are the Kama Aina of Davos.
All right, so this is my first Davos.
Wow.
This is your 24th
Right.
Davos.
What's it like being a nice Hawaiian girl here in Davos?
You know, it's chilly, but I'm liking the vibe.
Okay.
What's the mood this year? Are people anxious? Are they optimistic? Or are they confused about the future?
Well, it's an exciting moment. There's no question. This is just an unbelievable, amount of change. And I think when there's this much change and this much excitement, people are a little frenetic. And I think that, sometimes Davos is like a measurement of the economy. That's not what's going on. Well, is the economy good? Is it bad? How are people feeling about the economy? This is more like, well, what's happening exactly in the world? Because you have the AI situation, you have the political situation, you've got, these very broad shifts, and I think that is what's really happening here. There's a lot of discussion. And, Davos was built on the concept of a multi-stakeholder dialogue, the idea that we bring in lots of different kinds of people, political leaders, business leaders, spiritual leaders, cultural leaders, and have a conversation. And this year's Davos is about the spirit of dialogue, and that is playing out in spades.
Well, talking about that spirit, we're waiting for President Trump to arrive. You've said you want to see him prioritize U.S. businesses. What does that mean?
Well, I think the number one thing is, for the U.S. president is, as he is doing his job all over the world, he needs to support U.S. businesses and make them successful. And I was with Macron yesterday, and his job was to make French businesses successful. And there's no difference. That's the role of the nation-state leader is to help the people of their state. And so I have a lot of respect for President Trump and how he always supports the businesses in the United States.
So you're using Davos sort of as a live demo for some of Salesforce's new digital labor tools. I know you were prepping on Slackbot, but a lot of AI customers are saying...
I'm supposed to give away my secrets, Emily. That's not right.
I don't think that's too big a secret, but a lot of customers are saying they're sort of stuck in AI pilot purgatory.
Yeah.
Like they're not...
Yeah.
They're trying stuff, but it's just not working.
It's unfortunate because there's so much that you can do right now in AI. Unfortunately, there's so many false narratives. So I think because so many companies and pundits have said things that are not true, it kind of freezes certain customers and they don't know who to believe. So that's why, like we were talking just before we went on, that Ramon is here, the CEO of Pepsi, it's a new generation, and he just deployed 125,000 of his salespeople, 125,000, supporting millions of businesses, a lot of small and medium businesses all over the world who sell Pepsi, using new AI generation tools that we built for him. Really only took us a few months, and they're getting fantastic results. And that all started actually last year. I saw Ramon, and he once said, I'm ready to get a new level of efficacy in Pepsi. And another, Raj is here from FedEx, the CEO of FedEx. We just finished with him. He was a year ago saying, I've got trouble selling internationally. We identified all of his domestic customers that when they start to work with his salespeople, his website, and they haven't done international, now we surface them as an opportunity for international. It's generated hundreds of millions of dollars for FedEx. So there is great opportunities right now to deploy AI. And look, that's our job. Our job to sell it, to convince, show the use cases, make people excited about it. And that's what we're doing here. We will meet with more than 500 CEOs one-on-one here.
you obviously have also taken on a sort of, a policy bent. You recently apologized for endorsing President Trump sending the National Guard to San Francisco. What did you learn from that moment, and how will you continue to reconcile the sort of Salesforce Ohana values with the administration's policies, whether it's ICE raids in Minneapolis or taking over Greenland?
That's such a great question. Emily, the way I look at it, and I think that this is probably the right way to look at it, is I've been doing this for 26 years now. Yes, Salesforce amazingly is 26 years old, 80,000 employees. We'll do more than $41 billion in revenue this year. Presidents are constantly changing, but our core values are not changing. And so we're just anchored down into our core values, and then we just speak to that and what we're trying to achieve as a business to reflect back into our customers and our communities what those values are. As you know, in San Francisco, where we are the largest tech company, there have been a lot of challenges. And so, I always have anxiety about safety for our employees. I think that anxiety just manifests into how can we create a greater San Francisco? And so I'm excited to be working with everyone from Mayor Lurie to President Trump to do that.
You're really focused on AI and especially its impact on teens, and you've been sort of raising the alarm about AI influencing teen suicides, which is, it's horrible that we even have to talk about this. You've called them suicide coaches. What should companies be doing about this?
Well, I think we should talk about that we are dealing with a new kind of very unwieldy technology, which left by itself, these large language models, they can do all kinds of terrible things. I mean, they can do a lot of great things too. You've used them, they can summarize things and you can ask them queries and you can get information. But unfortunately, we saw this year this horrible example where this company, Character AI specifically, started to find that their product was turning into a suicide coach for their customers. And one of the most horrific things I've ever seen in technology is these children, died. And it was completely unnecessary. And I think it needs to be a wake-up call that, we're letting all of this AI technology out fully unregulated. And by the way, remember, that's true what we did with social media as well. And you probably remember what I said in 2018 here, which was social media was becoming the same kind of very dangerous technology. And look, a lot of governments have made changes around social media now. So you go to a lot of countries, if you're not 17, 18 years old, you're not going to use social media. There are controls, there are protections. We need to get there with AI now. There doesn't need to be any more deaths. We need to be taking this seriously. And AI is great, it's incredible, but these models, they're inaccurate, they hallucinate, they're kind of hard to control.
So what should we do? I mean, should CEOs be held personally liable? I was talking to Dennis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind, and I asked, look, if we knew every company in every country would pause, should we pause AI so society and regulation can catch up? And he said, yes, he would be in favor of that. Would you be in favor of that?
Emily, number one, tech hates regulation. You know that they hate it, right? They get people on, it slows down innovation. They hate regulation. They hate it. Except one regulation they love, Section 230, which basically says they're not held responsible or accountable for these deaths or for anything that their social media or their AI does. And that needs to change because here at Bloomberg, if you say something, you're held accountable. And I own Time. And if we say something, we're held accountable. But these companies are not held accountable because of a very specific federal regulation called Section 230. It needs to be reshaped, reformed, basically restructured to really reflect social media and AI and the dangers that we see. And that is something that we should all be pushing for, that these companies need to be held accountable. And right now, they're not going to be held accountable because of this regulation. And
what regulation is the right regulation? California's tried to regulate. David Sachs has his own version. I know you just chatted with him. Is there any regulation?
Well, I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with David. He's a close friend of mine later today. I hope you tune in. And we're going to talk about that because, look, I think social media kind of is almost like a best practice that we can learn from. That if we look around the world, you'll see that a lot of countries, not necessarily ours, but a lot of countries have made really good changes. And we could make those changes too. Because, it's kind of funny. I'm like a large language model myself. I feel like I'm putting one word together. But I have context. I have a life. I was born. I have a childhood. I have friends. Hopefully you're one of them. And I have a creator, I have a higher power that I'm connected to. These large language models, they're ready by themselves. They were not born. They don't have a childhood. They don't have context. They're not connected to a creator. So that they're running kind of in a different way, and then all of a sudden it feels very familiar. It feels like, this is my friend. It's not your friend. So we need to step in now, and look, we can kind of see where it's going. It's not completely out of control.
Right.
So now is the moment, and I think people like you and others should be aggressive about this.
Last quick question, and it feels almost trite going to the stock, but you're trying to build your company on this new emerging technology. Wall Street's really down on software. Wall Street's Salesforce stock is taking a beating, quickly. What is happening?
Well, I've been doing this for 26 years, and every now and then the software sector kind of falls out of favor. It doesn't mean our financials are out of favor. I mean, we'll do more than $41 billion in revenue this year, more than $15 billion in cash flow. Our margins are more than 34%. We're all record numbers, by the way. And we just introduced an amazing new version of Slack. That was Slackbot, the new AI-enabled Slack that has the context and the AI built in. We have Agent Force helping our customers deliver customer agents. We have employee agents and customer agents. We've rebuilt our architecture to have a data layer, an application layer, the Agent Force layer, and then these agents that sit on the top of the ecosystem. That's been a lot of work in the last 3 years, selling a lot of huge deals. But, you sometimes have to wait around for Wall Street to realize, wow, this is a huge opportunity, and we're just going to keep executing it.
Yes or no? Are you at 1 billion yet? 1 billion agents?
I think we're beyond that. I haven't actually counted them all, but, here's the way to think about it. We now just passed, and I think we're number 1 or number 2 enterprise software company, or maybe software company overall, in the use of tokens. Tokens are what these models generate to generate their intelligence. We just passed 11.1 trillion tokens. And you remember we talked after our earnings, and we were about 3 trillion tokens. And that idea that as an enterprise software company, we're publicly reporting and talking about the number of tokens. And I know all of those people, who love Bilbo Baggins are wondering if that's the tokens. It's a different tokens.
All right. Mark, next time we'll have to do this in Hawaii. Thank you. Yes,
I hope you're okay.
I'm good. I'm surviving. Thank you. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for joining us.
Next time is Waikiki Beach. Let's do that.
Absolutely. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
Great stuff, Emily. Thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Emily Chang there. To point to markets now, because futures do seem to be staging a rebound, a definite sense of at least a little bit of calm coming back into the market in Japan, though we're not at the levels that we were at before yesterday's massive sell-off. But as you can see, futures pointed higher. If we look at bonds are also rebounding ever so slightly. We have the Japanese 10-year down about 7 basis points, the 30-year down 14 basis points, and that seems to be at least bleeding a little bit into the US market, although we're still elevated with the 10-year yield at 427.67. And I do want to point to gold as well, also being above $4,800 an ounce. It topped $4,900 an ounce earlier. Coming up, a live panel from Davos with Sergio Ermotti, Gita Gopinath, and more next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Jason Kelly, and this season on Power Players, we're taking you behind the scenes to see how the business of sports has gone global.
I want sports to grow. I want sports to be bigger because we have talent.
What we have achieved in the NWSL from an investor perspective over 2 years is the equivalent of what it took other leagues 25 to 30 years to achieve.
You've got to have a business that's sustainable. The only way it's sustainable is got to make money.
Yes, sir.
Watch Confess by Nosy. You low down and dirty. Real people share their deepest secrets. You are the father. We're unlocking phones, uncovering the shocking truth, and finding a way to heal through it all. If you're scared, you step up and be the man. Watch all your favorites. The Cuomo Show, Maury, you threw him out.
This is a deadbeat.
The People's Sport.
I can tell you that would not be happening in my house.
Don't miss a moment. Watch Confess by Nosy on Pluto TV.
It takes grit to stay in the game.
I want success. Get it for me.
It takes strength to keep up the fight.
Oh, what a shot.
It takes courage to make the leap. I need you to trust me. One last time. But to stream it all on Paramount Plus, all it takes is a Walmart Plus membership. Sounds good to me. So you can get all the hits at no additional cost. I'm just getting started. That's crazy, right? A Paramount Plus subscription is included in a Walmart Plus membership.
Hi, I'm Wayne Campbell. Excellent.
Swings world, big world, body time, let's go. Hurry up! Swing. We're not moving.
If you're gonna spew into this.
Swings world, big world, body time, let's go. Swing. Good night, Birdie Eye.
Pretty ugly.
February 26th. They haven't seen Maddie Matlock coming. Kathy Bates is Matlock. I found something, baby.
What should we tell him? We stick together. We have a problem.
Matlock. Catch up now on Paramount Plus. New episodes return to CBS February 26th.
Rail, name something that's hard to do with your eyes open. Read. Name something that's hard to do with your eyes open. This boy in college. He enrolled in that now. He leaned into the mic and said, read, Steve. Okay.
Watch the Family Feud channel on Pluto TV.
It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Flynn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Stock futures rising after the S&P 500 posted its biggest drop in 3 months. Japanese bonds rebounding, lifting global debt markets. President Trump brushing off concerns of jeopardizing trade deals with the EU ahead of his speech in Davos. And Netflix with a cautious forecast due to higher program spend and a potential cost around the. So let's take a look at those futures. Very definitely pointed higher and back up on the rebound now, having erased some of those gains earlier. So it looks like we might have a green day after a very, very Fred day yesterday in the United States. It's partially because of bonds. If we take a look at where the Japanese 10-year and 30-year and 40-year are trading well below yields that we saw yesterday. So that 30-year yield is down 14 basis points. It's seeping a little bit into the US, but there you can see the 10-year yield only down about a basis point right now, just a little more than that. We're still elevated at 427.87, and gold is still above $4,800 an ounce. Let's get to some individual movers now for some stocks to watch. Here's Chloe Malley. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Netflix is seeing some weakness today after providing quite a tepid outlook for the first quarter and also saying it will need to pause buybacks to accumulate cash so that it can fund this acquisition of Warner Brothers. And so despite the fact that fourth quarter earnings were actually quite solid, investors were disappointed by this cautious outlook and those concerns around acquisition costs, and therefore we're down almost 6% in pre-market trading. Moving on to United Airlines, which is in the green this morning after solid fourth quarter results and also an upbeat outlook for 2026, echoing what Delta has already said. So there might be a rebound in the aviation industry after a volatile 2025. And finally, Intel is having another good day today after a solid day yesterday already. It was upgraded by HSBC and Seaport, and there's the AI demand that's really driving those orders for Intel, and therefore a brightening outlook, which is reflected in those shares in pre-market trading this morning.
Yeah, and that's after nearly a 3.5% gain yesterday. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Malley there. So as we've been saying, futures in the green now after a sharp drop for equities the last session. Bloomberg's Ben Ram is back with us. Ben, the Sell America trade does seem to have found a floor. Does it all depend on what President Trump tells Fora in Davos later?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot will be riding on what how he's going to characterize this path with the European Union. I think that what we can all take away from what has happened of late and what has happened last year is that, look, this is a market. These are two people, Scott Bessent and President Trump, of course, are two people who are acutely cognizant of what is happening in the markets. And if the markets are in upheaval for a prolonged period of time, that's not something they are comfortable with. And therefore, there is a considerable sense that they will dilute the measures that they've announced. Even if you look at what Scott Bessent was saying yesterday,
to the press, his message was look beyond what the bluster has been and look to what happened in 2024, meaning they will dial back some of those tensions.
Yes. Ben, thank you so much. Ben ran there for us in Dubai. Now let's go to Davos, where Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hornern is standing by. Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. I'm now joined by, of course, the special envoy for peace negotiations. The Middle East, his portfolio has expanded as well to what's going on in Ukraine. Steve Witkoff, thank you so much for joining us here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So this Davos, I thought I would start with you talking about your portfolio, Russia, the Middle East. You successfully negotiated peace in Gaza. But we first have to talk about this elephant in the room when it comes to Greenland. What's the thinking behind this?
Well, I think the president feels, as many other presidents before him have indicated, that it's of strategic significance, importance. It's just strategically critical, and we're in the best position to defend it against adversaries and enemies. And I agree with that position.
The president's talking about if he doesn't get Greenland, there's going to be tariffs on the Europeans. At the same time, you're trying to bring the Europeans on board to get an agreement on their soil, on their continent in Ukraine. Does it make your job more challenging?
No, he makes my job easier, actually. I'm his emissary, and he sets the table pretty good for people like me.
Do you think there'll be an offer on Greenland? What are the conversations like right now?
I think the president is an incredible negotiator. He'll get to the right place.
And those negotiations could potentially take place here in Davos.
I think there'll be some discussions here.
Do you think a lot of leaders are going to show up to the Board of Peace event because Emmanuel Macron has left, von der Leyen's leaving, they're all going to have an emergency summit on Greenland?
You know, we've got 20 or maybe 25 leaders who have already said yes. This is not such an easy place to get to. They've already said yes. I think you're going to see overwhelming response. We had many people who we weren't sure if they were going to even want to get an invitation. Now they're calling up for invitations. So everyone wants to be a part of this. What we're going to do here, what the president is going to do here, will be it'll be game-changing for the world.
How have you pushed the ball forward when it comes to Ukraine talks here? I know Kirill Dmitriev was here on the ground.
Yes.
He was tweeting about how the talks went well.
He's a tweeter.
Yeah, he is. He follows me. Can you give us some insight into, if the talks are going well, where are we at this moment? What is the state of play?
Well, the Ukrainians have said that we're 90% done. And I agree with them. In fact, I think that we've made even more significant improvement over this past weekend. We were meeting with Kirill Budanov, who is, of course, their new vice president, ran military intelligence for them. Their head of the parliament, David, and with Rustem Umerov, and we made even more progress during those meetings in Miami this past week. I'll be with them tonight. And I think that, and then I'm going to Moscow with Jared. All of these discussions are...
When are you going to Moscow?
Jared and I will leave Thursday night and arrive in Moscow late at night and then go over to the UAE afterwards for working groups.
So do you think we are close to the final 10% of this deal? Do you think this will get done in the next few weeks?
Final 10%, I don't know about the next few weeks, but I know we've made more progress in the last 6 or 7 weeks since Geneva than we've made, according to the Ukrainians now. I'm going to use their, what they say. According to the Ukrainians, more progress than in the last 3 or 4 years.
We've seen Russia continue their attacks, especially on critical infrastructure, most recently energy infrastructure, leaving thousands, maybe millions of Ukrainians without power, without heat. Do you think Putin is truly here for a peace deal?
Well, first of all, they're in a war, and so they're shooting at each other, and we don't condone that. I mean, we think it's unfortunate. That's why the president and me and the president, with Jared at the president's direction, are working so hard for the peace. We hope that'll occur. We think people, you're right, are suffering on both sides. It's cold there, and not to have heat is terrible. And we've got to correct all of these things. But a peace deal corrects it. And the president is focused on that peace deal. It's a very, very important part of his agenda from a foreign policy standpoint.
But do you think Putin is there, or is he just dragging negotiations on for the sake of it?
I think that they've asked for the meeting. The Russians have invited us to come, and that's a significant statement from them. And Kirill was here yesterday and working on this with us. So I think everybody is embedded in the process and wants to see a peace deal happen.
If we do not get to a peace deal, What does the toolkit look like in terms of potentially more punishments on Russia? I know I spoke to a lot of CEOs which said it was a pretty big deal. The president went after Lukoil and Rosneft. What other measures do you think we could see?
Well, if a peace deal happens?
If it doesn't happen.
Oh, if it doesn't happen, okay. Well, we've sanctioned them quite a bit. And I'm not sure what the president's game plan would be if it doesn't happen. I think if it doesn't happen, a lot depends on who he thinks is responsible for it not happening. Right now, we have people working together. We're trying to build consensus. We're trying to build unanimity of opinion. We've sent an invitation out to President Putin to join the Board of Peace. The same thing with President Zelensky. So let's hope. I want to choose to be an optimist here. I think we're going to get a positive response from both. I believe that.
If there is a peace agreement, what are you hearing from corporate America and even European CEOs about rebuilding Ukraine and even going back and doing business in Russia? All of them had a presence there, and then they fled at the start of the war.
We've told Ukraine that we think that their GDP, their economy, can triple over the next 10 years. That's an assessment, by the way, by BlackRock, who is working on this, and Larry Finkel's here now. They have done an exceptional job, by the way, with our staff. But we have told them that the sky's the limit for their economy, and we believe that. I think that's the secret. That could be the secret sauce here. Not just a peace deal, but aspirationally a better world and a better life for the Ukrainian people who have sacrificed so much, and for the Russian people as well.
I want to also ask you about your other big focus, which of course is the Middle East and what is going on with Iran. Have you had back-channel discussions with the Iranians, either directly or through the Omanis?
Well, the president has indicated that there have been some discussions, and that's what resulted in the Iranian statement that the killings will stop.
Do you believe them that the killings will stop?
Well, there's been a lot of killings, and
it's been
that's terribly unfortunate and horrific. That's a good word, because it is horrific. These people were defenseless. They were just coming out into the street saying, we want to change. You shouldn't be killed for expressing a viewpoint that you want changes. So Iran needs to change its ways. They need to do that. And if they do, if they indicate that they're willing to do that, I think we can diplomatically settle this.
Have you gotten a sense from this outreach that that is the path they want to solve this in a diplomatic way?
We don't have that sense yet. We would have, I think their foreign minister was supposed to be here, couldn't come, or was even maybe disinvited. I'm not sure. I was actually looking.
Do you think it would be appropriate for him to come here, given the level of destruction and killings?
Well, I was looking forward to meeting him, because I think we need to build that communication channel. We have to, because the alternative to that is not a good alternative.
Do you have plans? I know you're going to Moscow. Then you said you're going to go to the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
Do you have plans to potentially meet the Iranian foreign minister in the next few weeks or months?
We don't have a plan, but I think we're moving in a direction where we can have that conversation if they're willing to have that conversation.
I just want to end on what a year it's been. You're literally at the epicenter of massive seismic geopolitical shifts. You're very successful when it comes to Gaza. You're now dealing with a very hot topic when it comes to Iran. These negotiations continue to grind on Ukraine. What has been so challenging?
Well, first of all, we have a great administration. We have an amazing team. We have the ultimate boss, President Trump, and he sets the table for all of us. But Marco Rubio has been amazing too. I get to work with the State Department with an incredible array of talented people. And my job is now made even more easier because Jared and I are doing so much together. So the president is focused on solutions. He's focused on cleaning up all these conflicts. He independently has settled 8 wars, and now we're on a path to settle all the rest of them. And I'm proud to work for the administration. I tell the president all the time, these are the great moments of my life.
You don't strike me as you're preparing for an invasion of Greenland, though, so it sounds like potentially that could be solved here at Davos. Could you tell us what the president's going to say?
Well, I don't know what he's going to say, and I wouldn't presume to speak for him. But I think what he's going to tell, I think his feeling is that this is a strategic asset, and we have to make sure it's defended. And Denmark cannot defend it in an adequate way as compared to how the United States can defend it.
And just for logistics, as far as you're concerned, the president looks to be maybe on time now, catching up some speed.
I think so.
Okay, we appreciate your speech and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're incredibly busy. Tons of negotiations on the sideline here at the World Economic Forum. Of course, that was the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff.
Anne-Marie, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horner to be bringing us more interviews throughout the day from Davos, and we'll stay at Davos now because Bloomberg's Jonathan Farrell is discussing whether markets are mispricing the future with panelists including Sergio Armati of UBS and Geeta Gopinath of the IMF. Let's listen.
The potential upside.
All roads seemingly lead to tech though, Mark. It feels like it's all one trade, AI. And when we opened up this conversation and talked about what insulates us from the craziness at the moment, it seems to be the money that's being printed at some of the biggest companies on the planet. Is it more than just one trade in your world?
Yeah, so I think if you look at what all of this investment means, you have to look at what's the next step. And what's the productivity gain? So that's a key point. Because if you think about where the S&P 500 is trading, think about where Nvidia is trading, okay? Or other tech stars. If we're adding 1 or 2% of productivity gains to GDP over the next 5 or 10 years, or are we adding, on the high estimates, you can see people estimating 5 to 7%. If it's anywhere near 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% of productivity gain, no, this is cheap. These are cheap stocks, okay? And so where is it going? I think if we look at the market, we look at the tech spend that's happening, it's a matter of conviction. So I believe that the AI tailwind is not something that's going to stop tomorrow. Okay, this is a long-term tailwind that's going to happen. You know, we're not capable of choosing who the next NVIDIA is, but what we can do is invest in the infrastructure around it. One thing I'm certain of is energy creation, energy transmission, storage, water transmission, all of this stuff becomes more and more valuable, more and more important, and that's a multi-year tailwind. And you mentioned some of the politicians who were speaking about what's going on in their economies. You know, defense spend in Europe, defense spend in Canada, the budgets are doubling over the next 5 or 10 years. But that's not all going to planes and tanks and aircraft carriers. That's also going to AI spend. That's also going to quantum computing spend. So I think this is not a 2 or 3 year phenomenon that we're going to see. Now, if it turns out to be only 1% of productivity gains, yes, maybe it's overpriced. But there's this binary where either we're in a bubble or everything is green lights. There could be something in the middle. You know, maybe the productivity gains take longer to come online. So then maybe the valuations for certain sectors or certain companies are too high. But this is a 5 or 10 or 15 year phenomenon.
Can I take the other side of that? Because the way I hear it traditionally justified is that we benchmark it to the extreme. It's not the dot-com bubble, so therefore it's okay, and there's nothing to worry about here. So I would actually say that people look at history as a way to justify current pricing. It may never be the technology bubble. We may never see that again. And when I hear you talk about technology, you talk about the potential for the tech. But isn't that different to the way we price it in the market? The number one question I'm getting from people at the moment, and unfortunately they don't say it on Bloomberg TV, they say it offline, is what happens if OpenAI goes bust in 2026? What happens to the ecosystem? What happens to the way we price the whole market? That's a very different question to the potential for technology 5, 10 years out, is it not?
Yeah, I also think you're right. I think drawing a parallel to what was happening in the dot-com days are totally different. You know, these are assets that are making money, that are growing their earnings 30, 40, 50% year over year. You know, if you take Anthropic was talking about their revenue going from $1 billion on run rate last year to $10 billion this year. These are massive gains, right? So I think there's an actual impact that we can measure. None of it can be completely parallel to the past because the future is always going to be different. That's for certain. But I also, one point I would echo with you is that if you listen to the economists or the big investment banks who are making their predictions for what the S&P 500 was going to be, or what the next rate cut cycle was going to be in the next 12 months, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, yes, we expect 4 rate cuts over the next 12 months. None happened. We expect 4 next rate cuts over the next 12 months. None happened. So, yes, we're in a brand new world. Everything is changing daily. I do think volatility shocks like what we could hear today from President Trump could have a significant impact on the markets, and that could alter the course of where we're going. But I do think that still you have to try to look long term, which is very difficult with the news flow that happens on there.
Keita, just quickly, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, now I want us to make this distinction between the potential of the technology and where valuations are, both those listed on the stock market and those not listed on the stock market. We could very well have productivity growth of 1.5% a year, which is at the upper end of the estimates, and still we could absolutely argue that the market is overvalued. Because what we need to do is not just have a productivity growth, we have to figure out, is there a way for all of these companies with very high valuations who are doing trillions of dollars in investment and making at this point tens of billions of dollars in revenue, that they will all be able to generate the profits that justify the scale of investment that's being made and the valuations that they have. That's what concerns me. I think productivity will go up. I don't have a doubt productivity will go up. I just don't see how all of the current incumbents will have the kind of profitability and have a revenue model that can justify their valuations. And the reason for that is that it is a competitive space at this time. I mean, I work with the different LLMs and I keep switching between one and the other. One day is GPT 5.2, then it's Cloud Code. And that's just within the US. You have DeepSeek in China. So I think things are changing in warp speed. It's unclear what the revenue model is going to be for companies. And so I think that is the question mark. So I actually see a disconnect. I don't necessarily see productivity goes up. That means these valuations are justified. I think you could have both be. You could have question marks over that. And so, yes, so what is true this time around is that the companies, those listed on the stock market, unlike the .com times, are profitable companies. The revenue streams are not necessarily big ones. The big revenue streams are not coming from their AI investments, but they're coming from other sources. But then you have the other companies that are not listed, like OpenAI, which have very high levels of valuation, and that could be the indirect risk that we don't see.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've heard someone describe it. With AI, there are three formulas, right? There's the capacity formula, the application formula, and the investment formula, right? So the valuations we're seeing, right, is probably a product of this investment formula on the expectation or anticipation that one day, right, everybody in the world, all companies are going to find ways to apply it, right? And therefore everyone is also chasing the application formula. But the productivity gain, which we talked about, has to be backed up by people willing to pay for that productivity gain, right? And I think, Mark, you put it as a time frame issue, right? I think the mismatch of timing, right, between how much people are willing to invest to chase the investment formula and when customers are eventually going to pay for that productivity gain and translate into the productivity of these companies. I think that is really what we need to focus on.
Robin?
I would actually split it into three different constituencies, because I think when we have this conversation about valuation, the way we should think about it is a little different. So we've got the folks who are producing what is increasingly day by day more of a commodity, which are the tokens. So the token manufacturers, that's where the real concern on valuation has really ended up being. And they are creating what is now a bit of a commodity. And so we'll see, is there space for 3 of them, 5 of them, 7 of them? We'll debate. They're spending a lot of money. They'll build infrastructure. The infrastructure is going to be used. The tokens will be created as manufacturing capacity. And if one of them were to fail, at the end of the day, we'd probably see some of the others taking over that manufacturing capacity. Personally, I don't worry about that too much. The second constituency is the ecosystem that's built around that manufacturing. These are the folks who are truly innovating with agents and with capabilities that are essentially using that manufacturing capability of the general intelligence from the LLMs. And that's a whole new ecosystem that's going to allow us to do new and fantastical things. And that's not going to go away. It's going to be highly relevant and highly useful to us as we build, as we see and use all of these different capabilities. And then the third group are the users. And that could be us as individuals, it could be us as corporations. And this is where also the parallel with the dot-com boom breaks a little bit. We didn't see the type of productivity gain
that we're talking about here on stage for the users over a fairly short period of time back then that we could see now. We didn't sit here saying, wow, Amazon, my ability to shop online, the rise of AWS. We didn't see those things as transforming 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% productivity gains year after year compounding back then. Now that is how we're talking about it. So I think by looking at the three constituencies, you can say, is the market assessing where the value's ultimately going to be correctly, and how do we look into the future? There's so much obsession about that first bucket, that manufacturing of the tokens, but it's easy to miss the real adoption and integration, which is much more in the second two categories. Sergio, where do you stand on that?
Well, look, I don't think I can really add much more to what has been already well explained by my colleagues here. But one thing I would say that you mentioned before, AI bust. I mean, AI is here to stay and it's not going to bust. Maybe some people may disappear. I mean, like the old days, Netscape as a browser really doesn't exist any longer. But but my point is that, of course, what we touched on that. But when we talk about valuation, timing is very important. And this is the issue of investing, right? So I mean, the issue is that it's undebatable that even if it takes longer, we're going to create economic value. Mm-hmm. So, but what matters for investors is, number one, not pretending to bet on any of these players being the ultimate winner, because at the end of the day, it's going to always be a race. And the second one is that how long it's going to take to create this output, economic output. In every major transformation we saw in history, we saw the same elements of people in technology, for sure, overestimation of how impactful it will be in terms of financial returns, and underestimation of the scope of the changes. And going back to the infrastructure part of the equation, other people made that analogy with the railway system in the early days of the transformation of transportation. Right? So it's exactly the same issue.
Is it fair to say that railroads don't depreciate quite the same way GPUs do?
Well, maybe not, but it's an example on how a transformative process that created economic output created some collateral damages. And we need to accept that some investors will suffer, particularly the ones who are trying to do stock picking in investing in the sector.
Yeah, I think one point I wholeheartedly agree with you, Sergio, on is the importance of diversification. I think you mentioned that earlier, but there's diversification a few different ways. I think diversification of asset allocation and geographic investment is important. We're seeing, I take your point before, never bet against the U.S. The U.S. is going to continue to grow, and it's going to be the big market to invest in for now and for the future. But what we're finding is a lot of our investors, for that incremental dollar that they have to invest, they find themselves underweight Europe. And so they're saying, okay, maybe now is a good time to rebalance, because I'm very exposed to the U.S., I'm exposed to a lot of these tech names, so now's a good time to invest in Europe, and maybe I want to do it through the private markets, so we see a lot within our buyout business or within our infrastructure business. But the other way of thinking about diversification is within the asset strategy you've selected, and that's important too. And I think trying to find return streams that are kind of decorrelated. And that really limits your risk. In our infrastructure business, yes, we invest in data centers, but we also are the largest investor in Heathrow Airport. What drives the return for Heathrow Airport is very different from the data center that we're invested in. I think that's very important.
How expensive are those uncorrelated assets right now compared to the big theme at the moment?
If I was talking about this with an international investor earlier today, and for a very good performing data center today, yeah, they're expensive, right? And the multiples that are getting thrown around can be very high. Now, if we're talking about a trailing 12-month number or a forward-looking number, somebody said, a good data center with lots of different assets that is well contracted should be 25 times. Well, okay, 25 times forward or 25 times trailing. But on the other side of that spectrum, I was talking to a big investor in the data center space today. One of their largest assets is fully contracted for 15 years with two counterparties, Google and the U.S. government. That's pretty good paper. That's a pretty good long-term bet on who your payers are. So, yeah, they're expensive, but the upside potential is there.
You brought up another dimension of investing in this world, in this market regime, and that's partnering with the US government. The state capitalism that we traditionally used to focus on with China is now coming out of the American economy. Geeta, does that change the market backdrop?
Absolutely. I think each one of these events changes the backdrop. There is some bit of confidence that comes from all the regulation that happened to the banking system after the great financial crisis. You have all the stress tests, and I think part of the reason why every single event of this kind is not spilling over into markets is because there's a lot of faith in, or belief now, and justifiably, that there's a much more sounder banking system than existed at the time of the great financial crisis. The risk, of course, is that there are many other markets that were previously considered safe that are no longer safe, and that includes U.S. treasuries. If you look at the long end of the yield curve for the U.S., interest rates are above 4%, because you would ask yourself, well, that still seems cheap compared to the level of debt that's out there in the market in terms of the projected path of fiscal deficits for the U.S. and the path of debt for the country. Well, even the administration recognizes that, which is why they're all shortening their maturity and selling at the short end of the yield curve to prevent the long end from going up. So we're setting ourselves up with a bigger conflict with monetary policy, which is in the off chance that inflation would surprise on the upside and the Federal Reserve would have to raise interest rates. It would be even more costlier on fiscal policy than it would have been a few years ago, because it's not just the U.S. government, by the way. Pretty much every government is moving to the short end of the yield curve. So we risk being in this world where we really don't have any truly safe assets. And one of the points I want to make when we talk about equities and compare it to the dot-com period, the scale of exposure is just much bigger. It's not just U.S. households and U.S. equities, but international investors in U.S. equities never been bigger. Just in terms of any scaled multiple of GDP or any measure, the exposure is big. So any correction, and it doesn't have to be a very big correction, it doesn't have to be the size of the correction of .com, it could be half of that correction. I think the consequences of that for the world economy are larger this time around than back then.
You don't have corrective options. I mean, one thing I would say, just to reflect on the European debt crisis, I remember people would always say Italy is poor. And coming from an Italian heritage, I would take offense and I would say, no. The Italian government is poor. Italians are rich. And I think the same point needs to be made about America. The government might be poor. Americans are rich. Don't they have options to do something about it?
That's usually not how things work. When you're in a crisis, the way policies get coordinated is the government steps in, does stimulus, the Federal Reserve cuts interest rates. If we're going to be in an environment where there are questions around central bank independence, then the Fed would typically in an environment like this do quantitative easing. The question is, there going to be even more pressure on